Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over the January 2024 Living Environment Regents Exam. In our last video, link is in the description, we looked over part A, which was the first 30 multiple choice questions. Now we're going to be going over part B1, which is the next 12 multiple choice questions, so from 31 to 43. Right, so we're going to start off with 31. It says Venus flytraps are plants that have specialized leaves that can capture insects. Researchers have discovered that evidence that supports the claim that Venus flytraps do not capture the insects that usually pollinate them. The researchers studied the remains of captured insects in more than 200 plants. The remains did not contain any of the three most common pollinators of the plants. Additional research showed that 87% of Venus flytrap pollinators can fly, and only 20% of the insects captured can fly. The flowers of the Venus flytrap are elevated above the leaves of the plant. And they're asking, in order to support the claim that pollinators of the Venus flytrap are mostly flying insects, the researchers would have to do what? Okay, so let's look at what they said. So what they're trying to support here is the fact that the Venus flytrap does not capture insects that pollinate them, right? So pollinators could be bees, for example. And they want to prove that, hey, the Venus flytrap knows that if it eats its pollinator, it's not going to be able to carry its offspring, right? It's not going to be able to reproduce, so it's going to evolve to not to have some sort of mechanism to not kill the bees, right? And what the researchers did was they looked at all of the dead insect bodies on this plant, right? Because obviously a Venus flytrap kills insects, right? It has a fly and it has sweet things in these leaves down here. The fly smells the sweet things in the leaves. It flies down, it touches down, and when it touches down, the plant kind of closes up. So these two lips come in, closes it, and it digests the fly, right? And then the body stays in the leaf, right? So they in a very specific environment, they researched or they looked at all of the dead insects, right? And they saw that out of every single dead insect here, they didn't contain any of the three most common pollinators, right? So there were no bees, there were no bumblebees, honeybees, nothing like that, no pollinators there, right? And additional research showed that 87% of Venus flytrap pollinators can fly, and only 20% of insects captured can fly, right? So most of the Venus flytraps pollinators can fly, right? But pretty much a very small amount of the insects that were actually killed can fly. So that kind of proves that the Venus flytrap does not target its pollinators, right? Because there's no dead, but the dead bodies of the pollinators are simply not found within the plant, and the dead bodies that are found in the plant are those that cannot fly, whereas the pollinators can fly. And it says that the flowers are elevated above the leaves of the plant, so the pollinators have to be able to fly in order to pollinate these flowers up here, and that's how the plant doesn't kill the pollinators. It makes its flowers much higher than its mouth, right? So knowing that, how can we support the claim that the Venus flytrap, the pollinators are mostly flying insects, right? So compare the kinds of insect bodies with and without wings found in pitcher plants, a plant similar to the Venus flytrap, with the kind of insects found in the original study. I don't think this would be the best choice because we're asking about the pollinators of the Venus flytrap. If we're looking at a pitcher plant, which is also a carnivorous plant, it also eats things, that's not the same thing as a Venus flytrap. Its results may be similar or it may be different. That doesn't tell us anything more about the Venus flytrap, right? We want data that is very specific to only the Venus flytrap, right? And a pitcher plant is not a Venus flytrap, so we don't need to look at that. 3. Continue to study insects found in the Venus flytraps in the research area, but only record the number of insects without wings. Well, guess what? Our pollinators all have wings, right? Our pollinators need to have wings in order to access these flowers up top here, right? So if we're only looking at the number of insects without wings, we're only looking at what the plant does eat, right? Only 20% of the insects captured can fly. So you're going to be, and if you're looking at the insects without wings, you're going to be seeing the food that it eats, or the bugs that are attracted to the mouths, right? That's not going to tell you anything about pollinators. The pollinators need to be able to fly because they need to be able to make up this altitude. So that's false. Number 2 says, expand the study to other Venus flytrap habitats and determine the number of flying and non-flying insects remains found in the plants there. This would be the correct answer, right? Because if you want to make a general claim about all Venus flytraps, you need to look at different Venus flytraps in different areas. Maybe this specific Venus flytrap had pollinators or grew in an area with pollinators that only flew. But let's say that in a different part of the world, it grows with pollinators that can't fly, right? Does it still have a mechanism to save those, right? Or maybe this environment has really high flowers that are really high up or really short down, right? You want to be able to apply your theory to every single Venus flytrap all across the world, which means that you need to look at different Venus flytraps across the world in order to prove or refute your claim, right? So choice 2 would be correct. Choice 1 would not be correct because publishing a study immediately and asking other researchers to support their claim, you're kind of pawning the work off to someone else, right? You are trying to support your own claim. You're not making someone else support your claim, right? And this is not specific enough to be an answer. So number 32 says, in an experiment using a particular frog species, nuclei were removed from the intestinal cells of tadpoles and transported into eggs whose nuclei had been removed. A small number of these eggs developed into normal frogs. This suggests that the nuclei of tadpole intestinal cells can do what? So what happened? So we had nuclei. So the thing inside of the nucleus, which is going to be genetic information, right? Because think about it, what's inside the nucleus of the cell? It's DNA and its chromosomes. They were removed from the intestinal cell of tadpoles, right? So here we have like stomach cells or intestine cells. I'm just gonna call it stomach cells, right? And they have this nucleus inside of them, which has these the DNA, right, or DNA, or a chromosome. Now we're gonna take this nucleus out, which still has the DNA inside of it, and then we're gonna be transported into eggs whose nuclei had been removed. So now we have eggs, or we have a sex cell without a nucleus, and now this nucleus, now it has a nucleus, right? We originally, the egg did not have a nucleus, but now it does, and it has the stomach DNA inside of it. A small number of these eggs developed into normal frogs. Okay, so now these eggs were then fertilized by a frog sperm, right? And then they developed into normal frogs, right? So this suggests that the nuclei of tadpole intestinal cells can do what? Well, it means that it has to contain all the genetic information needed for frog development, right? Because what does an egg do? An egg gets fertilized, and then it creates a new frog, right? So egg plus sperm is a new offspring, right? So because these eggs were able to develop into a frog, it means that it has all the DNA or all the genetic information necessary to make a frog, right? This egg had 50%, right? And then this sperm then had the other 50%. They combined, they had 100% of the genes needed to create a brand new frog or new offspring, right? Number 1 says it can undergo meiosis and form gametes. This is false because the egg is already a gamete, right? All you did was just put new genetic information into the gamete. It didn't form anything. Remember that gametes are eggs and sperm, right? So you didn't make a new gamete here. You just put DNA inside of a gamete, right? So nothing was formed. Number 3 will undergo mitosis and form a new zygote. This is also false because you don't form zygote. A zygote is a fertilized egg, right? A zygote is going to be egg plus sperm, right? And that is fertilization. You don't undergo mitosis. You undergo fertilization to form a zygote. And 4, fused with frog genes already present in the zygotes. This would be false because that's not how you form a new frog, right? That's not how you make offspring. You don't fuse with frog genes. You get fertilized, right? And there were no new genes present in the zygote. The zygote gets its genes from a combination of the egg and the sperm, right? So the answer has to be 2. It contained all the genetic information needed for frog development, right? And another example is in humans, the egg will have 23 chromosomes, the sperm will have 23 chromosomes, right? And if this cell has 22 chromosomes and this has 23 chromosomes, this is missing 1 chromosome, right? And when these two fuse, it won't be able to form it will not be able to form a fetus, right, or an embryo, because it's lacking the amount of genetic information needed, right? If you're missing genes, you're probably not going to get fertilization. So number 33 says, which graph most accurately represents the relationship between the 4 kinds of bases found in DNA? Well, remember, there's this rule, the Chargaff's rule, and it says that the amount of adenine to thymine, right, is going to be equal, and the amount of cytosine to guanine is also going to be equal to one another, right? So we're looking for that. And the answer choice that contains that is going to be choice number 1, right? The number of adenine to thymine is going to be the same. The number of cytosine to guanine is going to be the same. Why? Because adenine only binds to thymine and cytosine only binds to guanine, right? So if I have 5 adenines on one strand of my DNA, so let's say A, that means that I need to have 5 thymines on my second strand of DNA, which is going to be right here, actually, in order for that to match up, right? Because they can only bind to thymine. And if this was guanine and cytosine, it would be the exact same. However many adenines that you have, that's the amount of thymines that you need. So it has to be proportional or the same. Number 34 says the graph below shows the acid tolerance of species living in water at different pH values, right? So the more shaded in something is, the more tolerant it is to that pH, level, right? So for example, this trout had these squares are very darkly shaded in because it's very tolerant of a pH level of 6.5. Meanwhile, these white squares are not filled in; they're white because it is not tolerant of a pH level of 4.5, right? So the darker it is, the more tolerant it is. So it asks us which statement best represents the information shown in the graph, right? So number one, frogs tolerate more acidic conditions than any other organism. Well, think about it. What makes an acid? What makes a base? The larger the pH number is, the more basic, right? And it says less acidic, more acidic. Less acidic means more basic, or the less acidic you are, the more basic you are. And the lower the pH number is, the more acidic you are. So this is acidic, right? And they already labeled it over here. So it says that frogs tolerate more acidic conditions than any other organisms. This would be true because frogs can they tolerate it well? No, because it's not fully shaded in, but they still can tolerate it. They can tolerate a pH level of 4.0, while everything else here is blank. It's completely white, 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 but here it's shaded in, so they can tolerate this pH level of 4.0. That's how we know that number one is our answer to 34. So now we're moving on to number 35. Has a photo of a camel. It says, which statement best describes these camels' characteristics? So desert camels have large feet, nostrils that can be closed, fat stored in their humps, a body temperature between 33.9 and 41.7 degrees Celsius, thick lips, a brown coat color, and hair-lined ears. And it's saying what describes these camel characteristics. Number one, natural selection favored these characteristics over the ones listed. Well, no, that's not true. Natural selection favored these characteristics, right? The camel evolved to have these characteristics to survive in the desert. If it says that camels have desert camels have these characteristics, which means that natural selection had to favor these, right? There are no other traits that natural selection could favor. Two, the listed characteristics are a result of manipulating genes in female camels. This is also false. You don't know that. It didn't say that. Camels evolved naturally to live in a desert environment, right? And they evolved to have these traits. They were not genetically engineered. Three, these characteristics have adaptive value for the camel. This would be true. Think about it. You are in the desert. You need to store food, right? Where do you store food? In water. You store it in your humps, right? You close your nostrils so that when the sand or sandstorms occur or dust storms occur, you don't get sand in your nose and you don't lose water through that, right? You have large feet so that you don't get burned on the ground. You have a large area. Brown color coat, right? So you don't attract as much heat from the sun. Hair-lined ears, so that you can protect yourself from the sun's rays. So all of these characteristics, the camel has these characteristics, and almost every single animal has a set amount of specific characteristics because it helps them survive in their environment, right? That they have adapted to live in. Camels have these characteristics because they needed them. We wouldn't necessarily say they need them, but they help them, right? They help them. Need is kind of too broad for this. So number 36 asks, or it says, humans rely on the stability of ecosystems for long-term health. Some of the current hazards to human health are represented in the diagram below, right? So human health, so you have health here, and all of these things, right, are going to decrease our health. So decreases in soil, air, and water quality can result from human activities that have what? So in order to decrease the soil and air qualities, right, you need to do something that harms your environment. So number one, negatively influence these resources by removing pollutants. This is false, right? Because if you remove pollutants, you are not negatively influencing it, you're helping them. If you remove pollutants from your environment, you're making yourself more healthy because you're increasing the soil quality, you're stopping climate change, and you're decreasing like infectious diseases if it's less polluted, right? So removing pollution would do the opposite. It would help us. Two, modified natural cycles increasing the quality of these resources. That'd also be false because if you increase the quality of resources, you are increasing soil, air, and water quality, right? Here it's asking us what would happen if you decrease soil, air quality. So your choice has to contain an answer, right? That has to say that you're doing an activity that decreases, that hurts, does not help something. Number three says, resulted in an increase in the stability of these resources. That would also be false because you're looking at a decrease in soil air quality. If you're increasing the stability of natural resources, you're helping yourself because you're making them less susceptible to negative changes, right? Number four, had a negative influence on the natural systems that maintain these resources. Choice four would be the correct answer here. Choice four would be the correct answer, right? Because we're having a negative influence on natural system that maintain these resources. So for example, water, right? The water cycle. controls the amount of water that we can drink, or the amount of water in our environment. If, for example, we burn a lot of carbon, it can lead to acid rain, right? So we are disrupting the natural system of the water cycle, because now acid is falling from the sky, and that decreases our quality of water, right? So decreases in soil, air, and water quality can result from what activities? It could result from a negative influence, right? Or it can result from us harming natural systems. So number 37 says current evidence has indicated that with an increase in global temperature, there will be more infectious and respiratory diseases. Worldwide efforts to slow down or halt the rise in temperature are being developed to do what? Increase strain on the biosphere, resulting in the destruction of ecosystems. That's false, right? Because we're trying to halt the rise in temperature, right? We're trying to halt global warming, and increasing the strain on the biosphere and destroying ecosystems is not helping or not reversing climate change, right? Two, introduce proposals that will limit the improvement of air, soil, and water quality. This is also false, because you want to increase air quality, right? You want to remove pollutants from the air, from the water, and from the soil, right? You want to remove these. You want to implement and improve strategy. You want to implement strategies that will improve air, soil, and water quality in order to lower the global temperature, right? Number three says protect resources for future generations. This would be correct, right? Because if you want to decrease climate change and decrease the destruction of the environment, you want to protect vital resources that the environment relies on. And number four, increase the release of greenhouse gases. This would be false, because greenhouse gases are the things that lead to a rise in temperature, right? So if you release more greenhouse gases, the temperature will rise more and more. Cool. So number 38 says, which sequence represents the correct interaction of organelles and processes for the synthesis of proteins, right? So proteins get formed in a very specific way, right? So proteins are made up of amino acids, and amino acids come from mRNA, and mRNA comes from DNA, right? So for number 38, we have to look at something that reflects this choice, and that choice is going to be 4. The nucleus is what contains the DNA, right? Then we're going to go into the gene codes, right? So we're going to encode the genes that lie in the nucleus, right? So here we're going to get our mRNA, which is then going to go into ribosomes, right? And ribosomes are going to translate that mRNA into amino acids. So here, instead of looking at the products of those organelles, we're looking at the organelles themselves, right? So the real synthesis of proteins, DNA, gets translated into gets transcribed into more DNA. Sorry, replicated into more DNA, right? Then that DNA gets transcribed into mRNA, which then gets translated into amino acids. And those amino acids then combine with more amino acids to form proteins, right? So here, the DNA is stored in the nucleus. The mRNA is going to be gene codes, right? And the mRNA is then going to be translated in a ribosome. And the proteins are going to be facilitated by amino acids binding to one another, right? So that's the exact same thing that I just wrote out, right? And you could have eliminated choices 1 and 3, right? Because the final product needs to be amino acids binding to one another. And you don't start in the ribosome, you start in the nucleus. Number 39 says, what would occur if both structures labeled B were blocked or damaged, right? So here you have the fallopian tubes. The eggs are stored here. They move through the tubes, right, into the uterus, where they attach to the wall and get fertilized, and a fetus forms here. Cool. So if the structures labeled B were to be damaged, the egg would not be able to unite with the sperm, right? The sperm will come through here, right, and then it will fertilize in one of the two tubes or in here, right? But if B is blocked or completely blocked off, right, the egg will never be able to actually descend into the uterus. So that's it, right? The process of mitosis would stop in the ovary. No, the female reproductive cycle will also not stop. The eggs will still try to go into the uterus, but guess what? They just won't be able to reach there. So now let's look at number 40. It says, identify the structure that supports the development of the fetus and is also influenced by hormones. This is going to be C, right? I just explained this, that the fetus is going to develop in the uterus, right? or it's going to be developed in this area right here, which is going to be C. It's going to bind to the uterine lining, right? And there's going to be nutrients here that support its development. So now we're moving on to number 41. It says that based on your answer to 41, base your answer to 41 on data below and your knowledge of biology. The data table shows an effect on secondhand smoke on newborn babies of non-smoking women. Right, so the women, they don't smoke themselves, but they're around other smokers. Secondhand smoke is just inhaling someone else's smoke, right? So you're walking on the street and someone's smoking a cigarette. They exhale and they let the smoke out. You walk through that cloud of smoke, you're inhaling secondhand smoke. So based on this and other similar studies involving newborns, medical professionals recommend that pregnant women avoid secondhand smoke because the chemicals in the smoke do what? Well, let's look at it. Women exposed to secondhand smoke, their babies have a lower weight. Their babies are shorter, right? 49.62 is smaller. And they have smaller heads, right? So clearly it has some change that makes the resulting baby a lot smaller, all right? So based on this, the chemicals in the secondhand smoke affect the growth of the fetus, right? Because the fetus and eventually the baby, the newborn, is going to be a lot smaller when you're exposed to secondhand smoke. So you want to avoid this because you don't want a smaller baby. You don't want a less developed baby. You want a fully developed baby, one that is not smaller, right? One that is the right size. Knowing at 42, it says water loss rates in various plant species. Even though these plants grow in different environments, they most likely control water loss through what? Through the action of guard cells in their leaves, right? Remember plant bio, and there's hot. When it's hot outside, the guard cells will close so that water does not evaporate through the leaves when it's hot out. So now looking at 43, it says the graph below represents the white-tailed deer population in certain areas of New York State during 2 different years, year A and year B. And you see that time year A happened before year B, and year B on average had a lot more deer than year A did. So one reason that the population of deer is greater during year B than year A could be that during year B there were fewer resources available. That'd be false, right? Because in order to have a higher average population, you need to have more resources to develop or maintain more animals, right? If you have more animals, you have more mouths to feed, so you need more resources to feed them. So 2, decomposers adding nutrients to the soil. This would be false because if there's less decomposers that add nutrients to the soil, there's less plants for them to survive off of and eat, which means that this population actually decreases. So 3 says white-tailed deer's predator presence. That'd be correct, right? Because if the white-tailed deer have less predators, there's less things eating the deers, which means that they can grow higher and higher, right? Because there's no predators eating more deer. There's less predators, meaning that less deer are eaten, which means that there's on average more deer. And if there are fewer white-tailed deer born, this graph or this peak would be much lower, right? So that's the only thing that supports that. That is the end of part B1. If you want me to go over part B2, let me know in the comments below. If you have any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope you learned something from the video, and I hope that you're studying for your Regents as well.